What happens when a hero comes home to find his brother dead, killed by the very people sworn to protect him? This is the story of Alex Johnson, a Delta Force commander known as one of the deadliest soldiers alive. A man who has faced terrorists, survived war zones, and completed missions so dangerous they're classified. But nothing could have prepared him for the battle waiting for him at home. When Alex returned to Atlanta after years of service, he wasn't expecting a hero's welcome. But he also wasn't expecting to bury his twin brother, Marcus. Marcus was more than just family. He was Alex's other half. While Alex fought enemies overseas, Marcus fought for justice at home, working as a community organizer who stood up to corruption and fought for the rights of his neighbors. But Marcus's fight cost him his life. One night, during a routine traffic stop, Marcus was shot and killed by police. The officers claimed they felt threatened, but Alex knew better. His brother wasn't a threat. He was a victim, and Alex wasn't about to let his death go unanswered. What started as a search for the truth quickly turned into a war. Alex discovered that the police department wasn't just corrupt. It was working hand in hand with a powerful real estate mogul who wanted to take over the neighborhood. Homes were being seized, families were being forced out, and anyone who stood in the way ended up dead or disappeared. Marcus had been trying to stop them, and now Alex was stepping into his brother's shoes. But Alex wasn't just a grieving brother. He was a trained killer with a mission. Using his military skills, he began to uncover the dark secrets behind his brother's death. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. The police, the mogul, and their wealthy allies were willing to do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried. And when they realized Alex was onto them, they came for him too. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated him. Alex wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategist, a fighter, and a man with nothing left to lose. When they attacked, he fought back. And when they thought they had him cornered, he turned the tables. What followed was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with Alex using every skill he'd learned in the military to outsmart his enemies. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, for Marcus, for the community, and for every innocent person who'd been crushed by the system. This is a story of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between brothers. It's a story about what happens when one man decides to take on an entire system of corruption and refuses to back down. But it's also a story that asks tough questions. How far would you go for justice? What would you do if the people meant to protect you were the ones you feared the most? And could you survive the fight? Stay with us as we dive into this gripping tale of revenge, betrayal, and the fight for justice. What would you do if you were in Alex's shoes? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because this is a story you won't want to miss. Marcus Johnson was more than just a name. He was a beacon of hope in his community. At 30 years old, he had already dedicated his life to fighting for justice, equality, and the rights of those who couldn't fight for themselves. As a community organizer in Atlanta, Marcus was known for his charisma, his unwavering dedication, and his ability to bring people together. He wasn't just fighting for a cause. He was fighting for his neighbors, his friends, and his family. Marcus believed in a better future, and he was willing to put everything on the line to make that future a reality. But his fight came at a cost. Marcus's activism wasn't just about rallies and speeches. He was on the front lines, standing up to a powerful real estate mogul who had been systematically buying up land in the neighborhood, often through intimidation and force. Families were being pushed out of homes they'd lived in for generations, and the police, who were supposed to protect the community, were complicit. Marcus had seen all: late-night evictions, suspicious arrests, and even violence against those who resisted. He knew the system was rigged, but he refused to back down. He organized protests, filed lawsuits, and even confronted the mogul directly, demanding accountability. But with every step he took, the danger grew. Marcus wasn't alone in his fight. His twin brother, Alex, was his rock. Though their paths in life had taken them in different directions, Alex to the military and Marcus to activism, their bond was unbreakable. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, the twins had always relied on each other. Marcus was the dreamer, the one who believed in the power of change, while Alex was the protector, the one who made sure Marcus's dreams had a fighting chance. Even when Alex was deployed overseas, the brothers stayed connected, sharing their struggles and triumphs through letters and phone calls. Marcus's activism inspired Alex, reminding him that the fight for justice wasn't confined to the battlefield. It was everywhere. But on a fateful evening, everything changed. Marcus was driving home after a community meeting, his mind racing with plans for the next protest. He didn't notice the police car following him until the lights flashed in his rearview mirror. What started as a routine traffic stop quickly turned into a nightmare. The officers claimed Marcus was driving erratically, but witnesses later said he was calm and cooperative. When Marcus reached for his ID, the officers panicked, mistaking his movements for a threat. In seconds, shots rang out, and Marcus lay lifeless in his car. The community was devastated, but for Alex, the pain was unimaginable. He had lost his other half, his best friend, and his reason to fight. When Alex Johnson received the news of his brother's death, the world stopped. He was thousands of miles away, in the middle of a deployment, when the call came. Marcus was gone. The details were hazy, something about a traffic stop, a misunderstanding, and a fatal shooting. But Alex knew his brother. Marcus wasn't reckless. He wasn't violent. And he certainly wasn't a threat to anyone. Something about the story didn't add up, and Alex's instincts, honed by years of military training, told him there was more to it. He requested an immediate leave and boarded the first flight home, his mind racing with questions and his heart heavy with grief. The moment Alex stepped off the plane, he was hit with the reality of what had happened. The community was in mourning. Marcus's face was everywhere, on posters, in news reports, and on the lips of everyone who knew him. He had been a pillar of strength, a voice for the voiceless, and now he was gone. Alex's first stop was his childhood home, where Marcus had lived. The house was filled with memories, photos of the twins as kids, awards Marcus had won for his activism, and stacks of flyers for upcoming protests. It was a shrine to a life cut short, and Alex couldn't help but feel the weight of his brother's absence. As Alex began to piece together what had happened, he realized that Marcus's death wasn't just a tragic accident. The more he learned, the more he saw a pattern of corruption and abuse. The police officers involved had a history of complaints, but nothing had ever been done. The real estate mogul Marcus had been fighting against was still pushing forward with his plans, seemingly unfazed by the tragedy. And the community was too afraid to speak out, fearing retaliation. Alex's grief turned to anger, and then to determination. He wasn't just going to mourn his brother. He was going to find out who was responsible and make them pay. But Alex wasn't just a grieving brother. He was a soldier. And soldiers don't fight without a plan. He started by talking to Marcus's friends, colleagues, and anyone who had been involved in his activism. He listened to their stories, gathered evidence, and began to see the bigger picture. The police department wasn't just corrupt. It was a tool used by the mogul to intimidate and control the community. Marcus had been a threat to their operation, and now Alex was stepping into his shoes. But Alex wasn't just a community organizer. He was a Delta Force commander trained to take on the most dangerous enemies in the world. And this time, the enemy was closer to home. As Alex dug deeper, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Marcus's death wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a calculated move. The real estate mogul, a man named Victor Crane, had been systematically buying up land in the neighborhood for years. But Marcus had been a thorn in his side, organizing protests, filing lawsuits, and rallying the community to resist. Crane had tried to intimidate Marcus, offering him money to back down, but Marcus refused. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had been pushed out of their homes, everyone who had been silenced by fear. And now he was dead. The police officers who killed Marcus were no strangers to controversy. Both had been involved in multiple complaints of excessive force, but internal investigations had always cleared them. Alex discovered that they had close ties to Crane, often providing security for his properties and turning a blind eye to his illegal activities. It was a perfect partnership. Crane got what he wanted, and the officers got paid. But Marcus had been a problem for both of them, and now Alex was determined to expose the truth. Alex's investigation wasn't easy. Everywhere he turned, he faced resistance. Witnesses were too afraid to talk, evidence mysteriously disappeared, and he was followed by unmarked cars. But Alex wasn't just a soldier, he was a strategist. He used his training to stay one step ahead, gathering information quietly and methodically. He even reached out to old military contacts, calling in favors to get access to resources and information. Slowly but surely, he began to build a case against Crane and the corrupt officers. But Alex wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for his brother. Every piece of evidence he uncovered, every witness he spoke to, brought him closer to the truth and closer to Marcus. He could almost hear his brother's voice, urging him to keep going, to fight for the community they both loved. And Alex wasn't about to let him down. As the days turned into weeks, Alex's grief began to transform into something else: resolve. He wasn't just going to expose the corruption, he was going to destroy it. And he wasn't going to do it alone. The community, inspired by Marcus's legacy, began to rally around Alex. They held vigils, organized protests, and demanded answers. For the first time in years, there was hope. But Alex knew the fight was far from over. The enemies he was facing were powerful, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. But neither would he. Alex Johnson wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategist. Years of Delta Force training had taught him how to assess a situation, identify threats, and execute a plan with precision. But this wasn't a mission in a foreign country. This was personal. Marcus's death had left a void in Alex's life, and he was determined to fill it with justice. He knew the odds were against him. The enemies he was facing weren't just armed and dangerous. They were embedded in the system, protected by money, power, and influence. But Alex had one advantage they didn't. He had nothing left to lose. The investigation began quietly. Alex started by revisiting the scene of Marcus's death, retracing his brother's final moments. He spoke to witnesses, reviewed police reports, and even accessed security footage from nearby businesses. What he found was disturbing. The officers involved had a history of complaints, but every time, they had been cleared of wrongdoing. Internal investigations were a joke, and the department seemed more interested in protecting its own than serving the community. But Alex didn't stop there. He dug deeper, using his military contacts to access databases and uncover patterns of behavior that pointed to systemic corruption. As Alex pieced together the evidence, a name kept coming up: Victor Crane, a wealthy real estate mogul. Crane had been buying up property in the neighborhood for years, often through questionable means. Residents who refused to sell suddenly found themselves targeted, harassed by police, hit with bogus fines, or even arrested on trumped-up charges. Those who still resisted often met with accidents, or worse. Marcus had been one of the few willing to stand up to Crane, and now Alex was beginning to understand why his brother had been killed. But Crane wasn't acting alone. The police department was deeply involved, acting as his private security force. Officers were paid to intimidate residents, silence dissent, and cover up Crane's crimes. It was a perfect partnership. Crane got the land he wanted, and the officers got a cut of the profits. But it wasn't just about money. The department had a long history of racism and abuse, and Crane's money gave them the power to operate with impunity. Together, they had created a system of oppression that kept the community in fear. Alex knew he was up against a powerful enemy, but he also knew he had the skills to take them down. His military training had prepared him for this kind of fight, a fight where the enemy wasn't just armed, but entrenched. He began to gather intelligence, mapping out the connections between Crane, the police, and the wealthy elites who supported them. It was a web of corruption, and Alex was determined to tear it apart. Alex's investigation took him into the heart of the community, where fear and silence had become norm. He started by reaching out to Marcus's closest allies, fellow activists, neighbors, and friends who had worked alongside his brother. Many were hesitant to talk at first, too afraid of retaliation to speak openly. But Alex's presence was different. He wasn't just another activist. He was Marcus's twin, a soldier with a steely determination that inspired both trust and hope. Slowly, People began to open up, sharing stories of harassment, intimidation, and violence at the hands of the police and Crane's enforcers. One story stood out. An elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years, told Alex how Crane had tried to buy her home for a fraction of its value. When she refused, the police began showing up at her door, accusing her of everything from noise violations to illegal renovations. Her grandson, a college student, was arrested on false charges and held for days without explanation. "They wanted to break me," she said, her voice trembling. "But Marcus, he gave me strength. He told me to fight, and I did. But now he's gone, I don't know what to do." Stories like Mrs. Thompson's were everywhere. Alex heard about families forced out of their homes, businesses shut down, and lives ruined, all to make way for Crane's developments. The police were always there, enforcing Crane's will with a brutality that left the community in shock. But what struck Alex the most was the silence. People were too afraid to speak out, too afraid of what might happen if they did. It was a culture of fear, carefully cultivated by Crane and his allies. As Alex gathered more evidence, he began to see the bigger picture. Crane wasn't just a businessman. He was a predator, using his wealth and connections to exploit the vulnerable. The police department was his enforcer, a tool he used to maintain control. And behind it all were the wealthy elites, politicians, lawyers, and business leaders who turn a blind eye to Crane's crimes in exchange for a share of the profits. It was a system designed to keep the powerful in power and the powerless in fear. But Alex wasn't just gathering evidence. He was building a case. He documented every story, every piece of evidence, and every connection he uncovered. He used his military training to analyze the data, looking for patterns and weaknesses, and he began to plan his next move. This wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about dismantling the system that had allowed it to happen. And Alex knew that to do that, he would need to hit them where it hurt the most. Alex's next step was to infiltrate the system itself. He knew that to take down Crane and the corrupt police department, he needed more than just stories and circumstantial evidence. He needed hard proof, documents, recordings, and first-hand accounts that would expose the full extent of their crimes. But getting that kind of evidence wouldn't be easy. Crane and his allies were careful, covering their tracks and operating in the shadows. Alex would need to get close to them, closer than anyone had ever gotten before. Using his military training, Alex began to gather intelligence on Crane's operations. He studied Crane's business dealings, his connections, and his routines. He even managed to get close to some of Crane's lower-level associates, posing as a disgruntled veteran looking for work. It was risky, but Alex knew it was the only way to get the information he needed. And it paid off. Through his contacts, he learned about a meeting between Crane and several high-ranking police officers, a meeting where they would discuss their next moves. Alex knew this was his chance. He prepared meticulously, using his Delta Force training to plan every detail. He set up surveillance equipment, including hidden cameras and microphones, to capture the meeting. He also reached out to a trusted journalist, someone who had covered Marcus's activism and could help expose the truth if Alex's plan succeeded. The stakes were high, but Alex was ready. He had spent his entire career preparing for moments like this, and he wasn't about to let his brother down. The night of the meeting, Alex positioned himself outside the building, hidden in the shadows. He watched as Crane arrived, flanked by bodyguards, followed by the police officers. They were laughing, confident, unaware that they were being watched. Alex's heart raced as he activated the surveillance equipment, capturing every word of their conversation. What he heard was worse than he had imagined. They talked openly about their plans to intimidate residents, silence dissent, and cover up their crimes. They even joked about Marcus's death, calling him a problem that had been taken care of. Alex's blood boiled, but he stayed focused. He knew this was the evidence he needed, but he also knew it wasn't enough. To bring down Crane and the police department, he would need to expose the entire network of corruption, the wealthy elites who funded them, the politicians who protected them, and the system that allowed them to operate with impunity. It was a daunting task, but Alex was determined. He had the skills, the evidence, and the resolve to see it through. and he knew that Marcus would have done the same for him. With the damning evidence from the meeting in hand, Alex knew it was time to escalate. But he also knew that exposing Crane and the police department wouldn't be enough. The corruption ran deeper than just a few bad actors. It was a system supported by powerful elites who had everything to lose if the truth came out. To dismantle it, Alex needed to strike at the heart of the network, and that meant going after the money. Using his military contacts, Alex gained access to financial records and traced the flow of money between Crane, the police department, and their wealthy backers. What he found was shocking. Millions of dollars have been funneled through shell companies, offshore accounts, and fake charities, all designed to hide the source of the funds. It was a complex web of financial crimes, but Alex was determined to unravel it. He worked tirelessly, analyzing the data and connecting the dots. Slowly but surely, he began to see the full picture. Crane wasn't just a local bully. He was part of a much larger operation. His real estate deals were funded by a group of wealthy investors who saw the neighborhood as nothing more than a profit opportunity. They didn't care about the people who lived there or the lives they destroyed. To them, it was just business. And the police department was their enforcer, using violence and intimidation to clear the way for their projects. It was a partnership built on greed, and Alex was determined to bring it down. But exposing the financial crimes wasn't enough. Alex needed to show the human cost of their actions. He began to compile a dossier, combining the financial evidence with the stories he had gathered from the community. He included photos of families forced out of their homes, videos of police brutality, and recordings of Crane and his allies discussing their plans. It was a damning indictment of the entire system, and Alex knew it had the power to spark a revolution. As he prepared to release the dossier, Alex reached out to his journalist contact and a few trusted allies in the community. He knew that once the information was out, there would be no turning back. Crane and his allies would come after him with everything they had. But Alex wasn't afraid. He had spent his entire career fighting for justice, and this was the fight of his life. He was ready to risk everything to honor Marcus's memory and protect the community they both loved. The day Alex released the dossier, the city erupted. The journalist he had partnered with published the story on the front page of a major newspaper, accompanied by a detailed breakdown of the evidence. Social media exploded with outrage as videos, photos, and documents went viral. People were horrified by the extent of the corruption and the blatant disregard for human life. Protests broke out across the city, with thousands demanding justice for Marcus and accountability for Crane, the police department, and their wealthy backers. Alex watched from the shadows as the story unfolded. He knew the release of the dossier would be a turning point, but he also knew it was just the beginning. Crane and his allies wouldn't go down without a fight. They had too much to lose: money, power, and their freedom. Alex expected retaliation, and he was ready. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, securing safe houses, gathering supplies, and staying one step ahead of his enemies. But even he couldn't predict how far they would go. Within hours of the dossier's release, Alex became a target. Crane's men and corrupt officers began hunting him, using every resource at their disposal to track him down. Alex's face was plastered across the news, labeled as a dangerous vigilante by Crane's allies in the media. But the community knew the truth. To them, Alex was a hero, a soldier who had risked everything to expose the corruption and fight for justice. They rallied around him, offering shelter, information, and support. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt a sense of unity and hope. But the fight was far from over. Crane and his allies were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. They began to strike back, targeting anyone they suspected of helping Alex. Homes were raided, businesses were burned, and innocent people were arrested. The police department, now exposed as corrupt, doubled down on their brutality, trying to intimidate the community into silence. But it didn't work. The more they pushed, the more the community resisted. And at the center of it all was Alex, using his military training to outmaneuver his enemies and protect the people he had sworn to defend. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Alex knew he couldn't keep running forever. He needed to take the fight to Crane and his allies, to dismantle their operation once and for all. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. He reached out to his military contacts, calling in favors and assembling a team of trusted operatives. Together, they began to plan their next move, a move that would either bring down the corruption or cost them everything. Alex's plan was bold, risky, and meticulously calculated. He knew that to take down Crane and the corrupt network, he needed to strike at their weakest point, their reliance on secrecy and control. Using the evidence he had gathered, Alex and his team began to systematically dismantle the operation. They leaked more documents to the press, exposing the financial crimes, the police brutality, and the human cost of Crane's greed. They also targeted the wealthy elites who funded the operation, releasing evidence of their involvement and putting pressure on them to cut ties with Crane. But Alex didn't stop there. He knew that to truly bring down the system, he needed to hit them where it hurt them most, their power. He began to organize the community, turning their anger and frustration into a force for change. Protests grew larger and more organized, with demands for accountability and reform. Politicians who had once turned a blind eye to the corruption were forced to take a stand, fearing the backlash from their constituents. Even some members of the police department began to speak out, exposing the rot within their ranks. As the pressure mounted, Crane and his allies began to crack. The wealthy elites, fearing legal consequences, started to distance themselves from Crane, cutting off his funding and leaving him vulnerable. The police department, now under intense scrutiny, began to fracture, with some officers cooperating with investigations in exchange for immunity. Crane, once untouchable, was now isolated and desperate. But Alex knew that desperation made people dangerous, and he was ready for whatever came next. The final blow came when Alex and his team raided one of Crane's properties, a hidden warehouse where he stored documents and evidence of his crimes. The operation was risky, but Alex's military training paid off. They moved quickly and quietly, securing the evidence and neutralizing Crane's men before they could react. What they found was a treasure trove of information, documents detailing every illegal deal, every bribe, and every act of violence committed by Crane and his allies. It was the smoking gun Alex needed to bring them down for good. With the evidence in hand, Alex turned it over to federal investigators, who launched a full-scale investigation into Crane, the police department, and their wealthy backers. Arrests were made, indictments were handed down, and the system of corruption began to crumble. But for Alex, the fight wasn't over. He knew that true justice would take more than just arrests and convictions. It would take systemic change, and he was determined to see it through. As the dust settled, Alex stood at the center of a community reborn. The neighborhood, once ruled by fear, was now filled with hope and determination. Marcus's legacy lived on, not just in the fight for justice, but in the unity and resilience of the people he had inspired. And Alex, the soldier who had risked everything to honor his brother, became a symbol of what one person could achieve when they refused to back down. The release of a dossier had turned Alex Johnson into a target. Crane and his allies knew that Alex was the driving force behind the exposure of their corruption, and they were determined to silence him permanently. But Alex wasn't an easy man to find. Using his military training, he had gone underground, moving from safe house to safe house, staying one step ahead of his enemies. He knew they would come for him, and he was ready. What he didn't know was how far they would go. Crane, desperate and cornered, called a meeting with his most trusted allies, high-ranking police officers, wealthy backers, and his personal enforcers. The mood was tense. The dossier had exposed their crimes to the world, and the pressure was mounting. Arrests were being made, protests were growing, and the public was demanding justice. Crane knew that if Alex wasn't stopped, their entire operation would collapse. "We need to end this," Crane said, his voice cold and calculating. "Find him, kill him, and make it look like an accident." The police, now fully aware of Alex's military background, knew that taking him down wouldn't be easy. They had access to resources, surveillance equipment, informants, and weapons, but Alex was a trained Delta Force commander. He had spent years honing his skills in some of the most dangerous environments in the world. Taking him on would require more than just brute force. It would require strategy. And so, they began to plan. Using their connections, they tracked Alex's movements, monitoring his communications, and following his allies. They knew he was working with a small team of trusted operatives, and they began to target them, hoping to isolate Alex and force him into the open. One by one, Alex's allies were arrested, intimidated, or forced into hiding. The noose was tightening, and Alex knew it was only a matter of time before they found him. But Alex wasn't just waiting for them to strike. He had been preparing for this moment, gathering intelligence on his enemies and fortifying his position. He knew that Crane and the police would come for him, and he was ready to turn their ambush into a trap of his own. Using his military training, he set up surveillance around his safe house, rigged the perimeter with alarms, and prepared escape routes. He also armed himself, not just with weapons, but with knowledge. He knew his enemies' tactics, their weaknesses, and their blind spots, and he was ready to use that knowledge to his advantage. As the days passed, the tension grew. Alex could feel the storm coming, but he wasn't afraid. He had faced worse odds in war zones, and he had always come out on top. This time, the stakes were personal. This wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. And Alex was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The night of the attack began like any other. Alex was in his safe house, a small, unassuming apartment in a quiet part of the city. He had chosen the location carefully, close enough to the community to stay connected, but far enough from Crane's usual haunts to avoid detection. The apartment was sparse, with little more than a bed, a desk, and a few weapons stashed in hidden compartments. Alex had spent the day reviewing his plans, going over every detail, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. He knew it was only a matter of time before Crane's men found him, and he was ready. What Alex didn't know was that Crane's enforcers had already located him. Using a combination of surveillance and informants, they had tracked him to the apartment and were now preparing to strike. The team consisted of 6 men, 2 corrupt police officers and 4 of Crane's personal enforcers, all heavily armed and highly trained. They had been briefed on Alex's military background and were under strict orders to take no chances. This guy's not just some punk with a gun, their leader had warned. He's Delta Force. He's dangerous. So we hit him hard, and we hit him fast. The plan was simple: surround the building, cut off any escape routes, and store the apartment. They would overwhelm Alex with sheer force, leaving no room for him to fight back. But Alex had anticipated this. Using his military training, he had set up a series of traps and alarms around the apartment, giving him early warning of any intruders. He had also mapped out multiple escape routes, ensuring that he could slip away if necessary. But Alex wasn't planning to run. He was planning to fight. The first sign of trouble came just after midnight. Alex was sitting at his desk, reviewing a map of the city, when one of his perimeter alarms was triggered. He froze, listening intently. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Someone was outside. Alex moved quickly, grabbing his weapons and taking up a defensive position. He knew the attack was coming, and he was ready. The first wave of attackers hit moments later. They came through the front door, guns blazing, expecting to catch Alex off guard. But Alex was waiting for them. Using the element of surprise, he took out the first 2 men with precise shots, dropping them before they could even react. The remaining attackers hesitated, caught off guard by Alex's speed and accuracy. But they didn't retreat. Instead, they regrouped and pressed forward, determined to finish the job. What followed was a brutal, close-quarters battle. Alex moved through the apartment like a shadow, using his training to outmaneuver his enemies. He was fast, precise, and relentless, taking out one attacker after another. But the odds were against him, and he knew it. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and the longer the fight dragged on, the more dangerous it became. But Alex wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for justice, and that gave him the strength to keep going. The apartment was a battlefield. Bullets tore through walls, furniture was overturned, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Alex moved like a ghost, using every inch of the space to his advantage. He had set up the apartment with military precision, creating choke points and blind spots that allowed him to control the flow of the fight. The attackers, despite their numbers and firepower, were struggling to keep up. Alex was in his element, and it showed. But the fight was far from over. The remaining attackers were regrouping, shouting orders to each other as they tried to flank Alex. One of them, a burly enforcer with a shotgun, managed to get close enough to take a shot. The blast tore through the wall, just inches from Alex's head, sending splinters flying. Alex ducked and rolled, coming up with his pistol aimed and ready. He fired 2 shots, both hitting their mark, and the enforcer went down. The sound of footsteps behind him alerted Alex to another threat. He spun around just in time to see a police officer charging at him, baton in hand. Alex sidestepped the swing and disarmed the man with a swift, practiced motion. He followed up with a brutal elbow strike to the officer's face, sending him sprawling to the ground. But before Alex could finish him off, another attacker opened fire, forcing him to dive for cover. The apartment was a death trap, and Alex knew he couldn't stay there forever. He needed to escape, but the attackers had blocked the exits. He glanced at the window. It was his only way out. But jumping from the 3rd floor was risky, especially with armed men waiting outside. Alex weighed his options quickly, his mind racing. He could stay and fight, but the odds were against him. Or he could take his chances with the window and hope to lose his pursuers in the streets below. Before he could decide, another explosion rocked the apartment. This time it wasn't a gunshot. It was a flashbang grenade. The blinding light and deafening noise disoriented Alex, leaving him vulnerable. He stumbled, tried to regain his bearings, but it was too late. The attackers were on him, tackling him to the ground and pinning him down. Alex struggled, using every ounce of his strength to break free, but there were too many of them. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. But just as it seemed like all hope was lost, Alex remembered something his Delta Force instructors had taught him. When you're out of options, make your own. With a surge of adrenaline, he twisted his body, breaking free from the grip of one attacker and delivering a powerful kick to another. He rolled to his feet, grabbed a knife from his belt, and went on the offensive. The attackers, caught off guard by his sudden burst of energy, hesitated just long enough for Alex to turn the tide. The knife in Alex's hand became an extension of his will. He moved with precision, striking at the attackers with calculated ferocity. One man went down with a slash to the thigh, another with a stab to the shoulder. The remaining attackers hesitated, their confidence shaken by Alex's relentless assault. But they didn't retreat. They regrouped, circling Alex like wolves, waiting for an opening. Alex knew he couldn't keep this up forever. He was exhausted, his body aching from the fight, and his ammunition was running low. He needed to end this, and he needed to do it quickly. With a deep breath, he focused his mind, blocking out the pain and fatigue. He had been in worse situations before, and he had always found a way to survive. This time would be no different. The next few moments were a blur of motion and violence. Alex disarmed another attacker, using the man's own weapon against him. He fired off a few shots, forcing the remaining men to take cover. But he knew he couldn't stay in the apartment. The longer the fight dragged on, the more dangerous it became. He needed to escape, and he needed to do it now. With a final burst of energy, Alex made his move. He grabbed a smoke grenade from his belt, pulled the pin, and tossed it into the center of the room. Thick, white smoke filled the apartment, obscuring everything and giving Alex the cover he needed. He moved quickly, heading for the window. The attackers, blinded and disoriented, fired blindly into the smoke, but their shots went wide. Alex reached the window and looked down. The drop was significant, but he had no other choice. He took a deep breath, climbed onto the ledge, and jumped. The fall was jarring, but he landed in a roll, minimizing the impact. He was on his feet in an instant, scanning his surroundings for any sign of danger. The street was quiet, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. He moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the main roads. His safe house was compromised, and he needed to find a new place to regroup. But as he ran, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder his instincts screaming at him to be careful. And then he saw it, a black SUV, its headlights off, creeping slowly down the street. Alex cursed under his breath. The attackers weren't giving up. They were hunting him, and they weren't going to stop until he was dead. He picked up the pace, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. He needed to lose them, but he also needed to fight back. He couldn't keep running forever. At some point, he would have to stand his ground. As he turned a corner, he spotted an alleyway up ahead. It was narrow and dark, the perfect place to set a trap. Alex smiled grimly. If they wanted to fight, he would give them one. But this time, he would be the one in control. The alleyway was a tight, claustrophobic space, lined with dumpsters and strewn with debris. Alex moved quickly but quietly, using the shadows to his advantage. He knew the SUV would follow him in, and he was ready. He positioned himself behind a dumpster, his weapon drawn, and waited. The sound of the SUV's engine grew louder, and then it stopped at the mouth of the alley. Doors opened, and footsteps echoed on the pavement. Alex counted 4 men, 2 from the SUV and 2 more who had arrived on foot. They moved cautiously, their weapons drawn, scanning the alley for any sign of him. Alex waited until they were close, then made his move. He stepped out from behind the dumpster and opened fire, taking down the first 2 men before they could react. The remaining attackers scattered, diving for cover and returning fire. The alley erupted into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, and the air was filled with the sound of shouting and gunfire. Alex moved like a predator, using the narrow space to his advantage. He picked off one attacker with a well-placed shot, then disarmed another with a swift, brutal strike. The last man standing tried to retreat, but Alex was on him in an instant, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. "Who sent you?" Alex demanded, his voice cold and hard. The man hesitated, but a quick twist of his arm convinced him to talk. "Crane," he gasped. "Crane sent us. He wants you dead." Alex's jaw tightened. He had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed only fueled his anger. He knocked the man out with a quick blow to the head, then stood and surveyed the scene. The alley was a mess, but he didn't have time to clean it up. He needed to move, and he needed to move fast. As he left the alley, Alex's mind was already racing. Crane had sent a team after him, but he knew it wouldn't stop there. Crane was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. Alex needed to stay one step ahead, but he also needed to strike back. He couldn't keep playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. He made his way to a nearby safe house, one he had set up as a backup in case of emergencies. It was a small, nondescript building, but it was secure and well-stocked with supplies. Alex spent the next few hours tending to his wounds, restocking his weapons, and planning his next move. He knew Crane would be expecting him to run, to hide. But Alex had no intention of doing either. He was going to take the fight to Crane, and he was going to end this once and for all. Alex's next move was bold and calculated. He knew that to take down Crane, he needed to hit him where it hurt the most, his operations. Using the intelligence he had gathered, Alex identified one of Crane's key facilities, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city where Crane stored illegal goods and laundered money. It was a hub of his criminal empire, and taking it out would deal a significant blow to his operations. But Alex knew he couldn't do it alone. He reached out to a few trusted allies, former military contacts, and members of the community who had been fighting against Crane for years. Together, they devised a plan to infiltrate the warehouse, gather evidence, and destroy Crane's operations. It was a risky move, but Alex was confident in his team's abilities. The night of the operation, Alex and his team moved like shadows, slipping past security and into the warehouse undetected. The facility was heavily guarded, but Alex's training and experience allowed him to navigate the defenses with ease. They moved quickly and quietly, planting explosives and gathering evidence as they went. But just as they were about to leave, the alarms went off. Crane's men had been alerted, and they were closing in fast. Alex and his team were outnumbered and outgunned, but they didn't panic. They had planned for this possibility, and they were ready. Alex took charge, directing his team with calm precision. They fought their way through the warehouse, taking out guards and disabling security systems as they went. The battle was intense, but Alex's training and leadership paid off. His team worked together seamlessly, covering each other and moving with purpose. They reached the exit just as the explosives were about to detonate, and they barely made it out before the warehouse went up in flames. The explosion was massive, lighting up the night sky and sending shockwaves through the city. As they regrouped at a safe location, Alex knew they had struck a major blow to Crane's operations. But he also knew that Crane would retaliate, and he needed to be ready. He spent the next few days analyzing the evidence they had gathered, looking for any clues that could lead him to Crane's next move. He also reached out to his contacts in the media, sharing the evidence and putting pressure on Crane and his allies. The media coverage was explosive, and the public outcry was immediate. Crane's empire was crumbling, and he was desperate. But Alex knew that desperation made people dangerous, and he was ready for whatever came next. Crane's retaliation came swiftly and brutally. With his empire under siege and his allies turning against him, he had nothing left to lose. He gathered his most loyal enforcers and launched a full-scale assault on Alex and his team. The streets of the city became a war zone, with gunfire echoing through the night and explosions lighting up the sky. Alex and his team were prepared, but the sheer scale of the attack was overwhelming. They fought valiantly, using every ounce of their training and skill to hold their ground. But the odds were against them, and they were slowly being pushed back. Alex knew they couldn't keep this up forever. They needed a new plan, and they needed it fast. As the battle raged on, Alex's mind raced. He knew that to defeat Crane, he needed to cut off the head of the snake. He needed to take out Crane himself. But getting to Crane wouldn't be easy. He was heavily guarded, and his location was a closely guarded secret. Alex needed to find a way to draw him out. Using the evidence they had gathered, Alex and his team launched a coordinated media blitz, exposing Crane's crimes to the world. They released documents, videos, and recordings that painted a damning picture of Crane's empire. The public outcry was immediate, and the pressure on Crane was immense. Politicians who had once turned a blind eye to his crimes were now calling for his arrest, and his allies were abandoning him in droves. Crane, desperate and cornered, made a fatal mistake. He reached out to Alex, offering a deal. He would stop the attacks and leave the city if Alex agreed to meet him face to face. Alex knew it was a trap, but he also knew it was his best chance to take Crane down. He agreed to the meeting, but on his terms. The meeting was set to take place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Alex arrived early, scouting the location and setting up his own traps. He knew Crane would come with an army, but he was ready. He had faced worse odds before, and he had always come out on top. This time would be no different. As the sun set and the warehouse was bathed in shadows, Alex waited. He could feel the tension in the air, the calm before the storm. He knew that this was it, the final showdown, and he was ready. Crane arrived at the warehouse with a small army of enforcers, just as Alex had expected. They moved in silently, surrounding the building and cutting off any escape routes. Crane himself stayed back, watching from a distance as his men prepared to storm the warehouse. He was confident, arrogant even, believing that he had the upper hand. But Alex was ready. As the first wave of attackers entered the warehouse, Alex's traps were triggered. Explosions rocked the building, taking out several of Crane's men and creating chaos. The remaining attackers were disoriented, giving Alex the opportunity he needed. He moved through the shadows, picking off the attackers one by one with precise shots and brutal efficiency. The battle was intense, but Alex's training and preparation gave him the edge. He used the layout of the warehouse to his advantage, creating choke points and ambushes that kept the attackers off balance. But despite his best efforts, the sheer number of enemies began to wear him down. He was running low on ammunition, and his body was aching from the fight. But he couldn't stop. He had to keep going. As the fight dragged on, Alex realized that he needed to change tactics. He couldn't keep fighting defensively. He needed to take the fight to Crane. With a deep breath, he gathered his remaining strength and made his move. He fought his way through the warehouse, taking out anyone who stood in his way. until he finally reached the exit. Outside, Crane was waiting. He had a small group of bodyguards with him, but they were no match for Alex. With a final burst of energy, Alex charged at Crane, taking out the bodyguards with swift, brutal strikes. Crane tried to run, but Alex was on him in an instant, tackling him to the ground and pinning him down. "It's over, Crane," Alex said, his voice cold and hard. "You're finished." Crane struggled, but he was no match for Alex's strength. He looked up at Alex, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You think you've won? There will always be someone like me. You can't stop it." Alex didn't respond. He simply tightened his grip and waited for the authorities to arrive. As the sound of sirens grew louder, he knew that the fight was finally over. But he also knew that the battle for justice was far from finished. The sound of sirens grew louder as police cars and federal agents surrounded the warehouse. Alex stood over Crane, his grip firm, as the authorities moved in. Crane's enforcers, realizing the fight was over, either fled or surrendered. The scene was chaotic, with flashing lights, shouting officers, and a lingering smell of smoke and gunpowder. But for Alex, it was a moment of quiet triumph. He had done it. He had taken down Crane and exposed his empire of corruption. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Alex felt the weight of everything he had been through. His body ached, his mind was exhausted, and the emotional toll of losing Marcus and fighting this brutal battle hit him all at once. He stepped back as federal agents took Crane into custody, watching as the man who had caused so much pain was finally brought to justice. Crane glared at Alex as he was led away, his face a mask of rage and defeat. "This isn't over," Crane snarled. "You think you've won? You've only made more enemies." Alex didn't respond. He knew Crane's words were empty threats, but they still lingered in his mind. The fight against corruption wasn't over. Crane was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and Alex knew there were others like him, powerful, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to protect their interests. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of relief. Marcus's death had not been in vain. The community had a chance to heal, and Alex had honored his brother's memory. As the authorities secured the scene, Alex was approached by a federal agent, a tall, serious-looking man with a badge that identified him as part of a task force investigating organized crime. "Alex Johnson?" the agent asked. Alex nodded. "We've been tracking Crane for years, but we could never get close enough to take him down. You've done what we couldn't, but this is just the beginning. We need your help to dismantle the rest of his network." Alex hesitated. He had been fighting for so long, and part of him just wanted to walk away. But he knew he couldn't. The fight wasn't over, and he owed it to Marcus and to the community to see it through. "What do you need from me?" he asked. The agent handed him a file. "We've identified Crane's key allies, politicians, business leaders, and even some within law enforcement. They're all part of this network, and they're all complicit in his crimes. But taking them down won't be easy. They're powerful, and they'll fight back. We need someone with your skills and determination to help us bring them to justice." Alex took the file, flipping through the pages. The names and faces inside represented a system of corruption that went far beyond Crane. It was a daunting task, but Alex knew he couldn't walk away. He had started this fight for Marcus, but now it was bigger than just one man. It was about justice, accountability, and the future of the community. "I'm in," Alex said, his voice steady. "But we do this my way." With Crane in custody and his empire crumbling, Alex turned his attention to the larger network of corruption. The file the federal agent had given him was a treasure trove of information detailing the connections between Crane and his powerful allies. It was a daunting task, but Alex was determined to see it through. He spent the next few days analyzing the data, identifying key targets, and planning his next moves. The first target on the list was a high-ranking police officer who had been instrumental in protecting Crane's operations. Alex knew that taking him down would send a clear message to the rest of the network. No one was untouchable. But it wouldn't be easy. The officer was well protected, with a team of loyal subordinates and access to resources that made him a formidable opponent. Alex decided to strike at the officer's weakest point, his ego. Using the evidence he had gathered, Alex leaked information to the media, exposing the officer's crimes and forcing him into the spotlight. The public outcry was immediate, and the pressure on the officer was immense. But Alex didn't stop there. He reached out to the officer's subordinates, offering them immunity in exchange for their cooperation. Slowly but surely, the officer's support began to crumble. The final blow came when Alex confronted the officer directly. He infiltrated the officer's home, catching him off guard and forcing him to confess. The officer, realizing he had no way out, agreed to cooperate with the investigation. It was a major victory, but Alex knew it was just the beginning. The next target was a wealthy businessman who had funded Crane's operations. Alex knew that taking him down would be even more challenging. The businessman was well-connected, with powerful friends in high places. But Alex was undeterred. He used the evidence he had gathered to launch a coordinated attack on the businessman's reputation, exposing his crimes and forcing his allies to distance themselves. As the pressure mounted, the businessman became increasingly desperate. He tried to flee the country, but Alex was one step ahead. With the help of his federal contacts, Alex intercepted the businessman at the airport, arresting him and seizing his assets. It was another major victory, but Alex knew the fight was far from over. The final phase of Alex's mission was the most dangerous yet. The politicians who had enabled Crane's empire weren't just powerful. They were untouchable, shielded by layers of influence, wealth, and legal protection. These were men and women who operated in the shadows, pulling strings from behind closed doors, their crimes buried under mountains of paperwork and legal loopholes. Taking them down would require more than brute force. It would require strategy, patience, and an unshakable commitment to justice. Alex began by studying his targets. He spent days poring over the files the federal agent had given him, cross-referencing names, dates, and transactions. He mapped out their connections, tracing the flow of money and influence that tied them to Crane's operations. It was a web of corruption so vast and intricate that it seemed impossible to unravel. But Alex wasn't deterred. He had faced impossible odds before, and he had always found a way to win. The first politician on his list was Senator Harold Grayson, a charismatic and well-respected figure who had built his career on promises of reform and transparency. But behind the polished speeches and public appearances, Grayson was one of Crane's most valuable allies. He had used his position to shield Crane's operations from scrutiny, ensuring that any investigations were quietly buried. Grayson was smart, calculating, and ruthless, exactly the kind of opponent Alex needed to be careful with. Alex knew that taking down Grayson would require more than just evidence. It would require a public spectacle. He needed to expose Grayson in a way that couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. To do that, he needed to get closer than anyone had ever gotten before. Grayson's estate was a fortress surrounded by high walls, surveillance cameras, and armed guards. Getting inside would be nearly impossible for anyone else, but Alex had spent years honing his skills in infiltration and reconnaissance. He spent 3 days observing the estate, noting the guards' routines, the blind spots in the security system, and the layout of the property. He even managed to intercept a delivery truck, posing as a driver to get a closer look at the estate's interior. On the 4th night, Alex made his move. Dressed in black and armed with a small toolkit, he scaled the estate's outer wall, avoiding the motion sensors and cameras with practiced ease. He moved silently across the grounds, using the shadows to his advantage, until he reached the main house. The back door was locked, but Alex picked it open in seconds, slipping inside without a sound. The interior of the house was as opulent as it was intimidating. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and priceless artwork adorned every room. But Alex wasn't there to admire the decor. He moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding the occasional staff member and disabling the security system as he went. His goal was Grayson's private office, where he knew the senator kept his most incriminating documents. When Alex finally reached the office, he found Grayson sitting at his desk, poring over a stack of papers. The senator looked up, startled, as Alex stepped into the room. For a moment, there was silence. Then Grayson's expression shifted from surprise to anger. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. "I'm the man who's going to end this," Alex replied, his tone calm but firm. He held up a folder filled with documents, evidence of Grayson's ties to Crane, his bribes, and his role in covering up countless crimes. "You've been protecting a monster, Senator, and now it's over." Grayson's face turned pale, but he quickly regained his composure. "You think you could just walk in here and threaten me?" he sneered. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I have friends in high places. I have resources you can't even imagine. You're nothing but a nuisance, and I'll have you dealt with before the night is over." Alex didn't flinch. He had expected Grayson to try to intimidate him, but he wasn't afraid. "You're right," he said. "I am just one man, but I'm not alone. And I'm not the one who's been stealing from the people, lying to them, and betraying their trust. That's all on you." Before Grayson could respond, Alex activated a small recording device he had hidden in his jacket. "I'm giving you one chance to come clean," he said. "Confess to what you've done, and I'll make sure you're treated fairly. Refuse, and I'll release everything I have to the public. Either way, your career is over." Grayson hesitated, his eyes darting between Alex and the folder of evidence. For a moment, it seemed like he might try to fight back. But then, slowly, his shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, defeated sigh. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't have a choice. They would have destroyed me if I didn't play along." Alex didn't respond. He simply pressed record and waited as Grayson began to confess, detailing his crimes and naming his accomplices. It was a damning admission, one that would send shockwaves through the political world. But for Alex, it was just the beginning. Grayson was only one piece of the puzzle, and there were still others who needed to be brought to justice. With Senator Grayson's confession recorded and the evidence secured, Alex knew the final stage of his mission was at hand. But he also knew that the fight wasn't over. Grayson was just one of many powerful figures who had enabled Crane's empire, and taking down the rest would require even more precision and determination. Alex had already pushed himself to the limit, but he couldn't stop now. The community was counting on him, and so was Marcus's memory. The fallout from Grayson's confession was immediate and explosive. Alex sent the recording and the evidence to a trusted journalist, who published the story within hours. The media frenzy was unlike anything the city had ever seen. Grayson's face was plastered across every news outlet, his crimes laid bare for the world to see. The public outcry was deafening, with protests erupting outside his estate and demands for his resignation echoing through the halls of government. But Alex didn't stop there. He knew that Grayson's downfall would send shockwaves through the network of corruption, and he needed to capitalize on the momentum. Using the information Grayson had provided, Alex began to target the other politicians and business leaders who had been complicit in Crane's crimes. One by one, he exposed them, releasing evidence to the media and forcing them into the spotlight. The process was slow and methodical, but Alex was relentless. He worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, tracking down witnesses, and coordinating with his federal allies. Each new revelation brought more pressure on the corrupt network, and one by one, its members began to fall. Some were arrested, others resigned in disgrace, and a few fled the country, hoping to escape the consequences of their actions. But not everyone was willing to go quietly. One of the most powerful figures in the network, a billionaire real estate developer named Victor Kane, decided to fight back. Kane had been one of Crane's biggest financial backers, and he had the resources to mount a formidable defense. When Alex began to target him, Kane responded with a brutal counterattack. Kane hired a team of mercenaries to hunt Alex down, and they were relentless. Alex found himself constantly on the move, dodging ambushes and staying one step ahead of his pursuers. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, but Alex refused to back down. He knew that taking down Kane would be the final blow to the network, and he was determined to see it through. The final confrontation took place at Kane's sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. Alex had spent days planning the operation, studying the estate's layout and identifying its weaknesses. He knew that getting inside would be nearly impossible, but he also knew that he didn't have a choice. Kane had to be stopped, and Alex was the only one who could do it. Under the cover of darkness, Alex infiltrated the estate, using every trick in his arsenal to bypass the security systems and neutralize the guards. He moved silently through the grounds, his senses on high alert, until he finally reached the main house. Inside, he found Kane in his study, surrounded by armed bodyguards. Kane looked up as Alex entered the room, his expression a mix of surprise and anger. "You," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I should have known you'd be the one to ruin everything." "It's over, Kane," Alex replied, his voice calm but firm. "You've lost. It's time to face the consequences." Kane laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You think this is over? You think you've won? You're just one man, Johnson. You can't stop what's coming." Alex didn't respond. He simply raised his weapon and took aim. The bodyguards moved to protect Kane, but Alex was faster. He took them down with precise shots, leaving Kane alone and defenseless. With Kane in custody, the network of corruption finally began to crumble. The remaining members, realizing that they were out of options, either turned themselves in or fled the country. The city, once ruled by fear and oppression, began to heal. The community, inspired by Alex's actions, came together to rebuild and demand accountability from their leaders. For Alex, the fight was over. He had done what he set out to do. He had honored Marcus's memory and brought justice to the community. But he also knew that the battle against corruption was far from finished. There would always be others like Crane and Kane, willing to exploit the vulnerable for their own gain. And Alex knew that, as long as he was able, he would be there to stop them. The fall of Crane's empire sent shockwaves through the city. For years, the community had lived under the shadow of corruption, their voices silenced by fear and intimidation. But now, with Crane and his allies behind bars, the city was finally free to breathe. The arrests were swift and decisive, with federal agents rounding up the remaining members of the network and seizing their assets. The media coverage was relentless, with headlines proclaiming the end of an era and the dawn of a new beginning. For the community, the impact was immediate and profound. The streets, once ruled by fear, were now filled with hope and determination. People who had been too afraid to speak out before now found their voices, demanding accountability and transparency from their leaders. Protests turned into celebrations, as the community came together to reclaim their city. But the fight wasn't over. The dismantling of the corrupt network was just the first step in a long journey toward justice and healing. The community had been scarred by years of oppression, and rebuilding would take time, effort, and unity. But for the first time in a long time, they had hope. And at the center of that hope was Alex Johnson. Alex had become a symbol of resilience and determination, a living testament to the power of one person to make a difference. But he knew that his work wasn't finished. The community needed more than just a hero. They needed a leader. And so, Alex stepped into that role, using his skills and experience to help guide the rebuilding process. He worked closely with community leaders, activists, and federal agents to ensure that the reforms were implemented effectively and transparently. He also reached out to the families who had been affected by Crane's crimes, offering support and resources to help them rebuild their lives. It was a daunting task, but Alex was determined to see it through. The impact of Alex's actions was felt throughout the community. People who had once felt powerless now felt empowered, inspired by Alex's courage and determination. They began to organize, forming grassroots movements to demand accountability and transparency from their leaders. The city council, once dominated by Crane's allies, was now filled with new faces, people who were committed to serving the community and fighting for justice. The changes were slow but steady. New policies were implemented to prevent corruption and ensure transparency. Community policing programs were established to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they served. And the city's economy, once stifled by Crane's greed, began to flourish as new businesses moved in and created jobs. As the dust settled, the community began to heal. The scars of the past were still there, but they were no longer raw and bleeding. Instead, They serve as a reminder of what the community had overcome and what they were capable of achieving. The streets, once filled with fear and despair, were now alive with hope and determination. People who had once been too afraid to speak out now found their voices, demanding accountability and transparency from their leaders. One of the most significant changes was the shift in the relationship between the community and law enforcement. For years, the police had been seen as an extension of Crane's empire, a tool of oppression rather than protection. But with the corrupt officers removed and new leadership in place, the department began to rebuild trust with the community. Community policing programs were established, with officers working closely with residents to address their concerns and build relationships. It was a slow process, but it was a start. Alex played a key role in this transformation. He worked closely with the new police chief, a reform-minded leader who was committed to transparency and accountability. Together, they developed programs to train officers in de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Alex also served as a bridge between the community and the police, helping to facilitate dialogue and build trust. Throughout the rebuilding process, Marcus's memory was a constant presence. His death had been the catalyst for the fight against corruption, and his legacy lived on in the community's renewed commitment to justice. A memorial was erected in his honor, a simple but powerful monument that served as a reminder of the cost of corruption and the importance of standing up for what is right. The memorial became a focal point for the community, a place where people could come to reflect, remember, and renew their commitment to justice. It was also a place of healing, where the families of Crane's victims could find solace and support. Alex visited the memorial often, finding strength in the knowledge that Marcus's sacrifice had not been in vain. As the community began to heal, a new sense of hope and determination emerged. People who had once felt powerless now felt empowered, inspired by Alex's courage and determination. They began to organize, forming grassroots movements to demand accountability and transparency from their leaders. The city council, once dominated by Crane's allies, was now filled with new faces, people who were committed to serving the community and fighting for justice. The changes were slow but steady. New policies were implemented to prevent corruption and ensure transparency. Community policing programs were established to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they served. And the city's economy, once stifled by Crane's greed, began to flourish as new businesses moved in and created jobs. As the city began to heal, Alex took a moment to reflect on the journey. He knew that the fight against corruption and injustice was far from over, but he also knew that the community was stronger than ever. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Alex's story was a reminder that change was possible, no matter how daunting the odds. It was a call to action for anyone who had ever felt powerless or silenced. And it was a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and unity. The story you've just witnessed is more than just a story. It's a reflection of the struggles and triumphs that resonate within communities across the globe. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit, the unwavering pursuit of justice, and the transformative power of collective action. Alex Johnson's journey, born from personal tragedy and fueled by an unyielding sense of purpose, serves as a powerful reminder that one individual can indeed make a profound difference. In the face of overwhelming odds, he stood against the forces of corruption, dismantling an empire built on deceit and exploitation. But his story is not unique. It is a mirror reflecting the countless acts of courage and resilience that occur every day, often unseen and unsung. The city's transformation, from a place of fear and oppression to a beacon of hope and renewal, underscores the importance of community engagement and civic responsibility. It demonstrates that lasting change is not achieved through isolated acts of heroism, but through the collective determination of citizens to hold their leaders accountable and build a better future. The dismantling of Crane's corrupt network was not merely a legal victory. It was a societal awakening. It was a moment when the community collectively decided to reclaim its destiny, to break free from the chains of fear and apathy. The healing process, though challenging, was ultimately transformative, fostering a sense of unity and shared purpose. But the fight against injustice is not confined to the fictional realm. It is a battle that is waged every day in communities around the world. It is a struggle against systemic corruption, against the abuse of power, and against the erosion of trust in our institutions. This story is a call to action, an invitation to each of you to stand up against injustice in your own communities. It is a reminder that you have the power to make a difference, to challenge the status quo, and to demand accountability from those in power. Look around you. Are there issues in your community that demand attention? Are there voices that are being silenced? Are there injustices that are being ignored? Do not wait for someone else to act. Step forward. Speak up. Organize. Collaborate. Support efforts to reform law enforcement, to ensure that those who are sworn to protect and serve are held to the highest standards of integrity and accountability. Advocate for transparency and accountability in government, to shine a light on corruption and prevent its insidious spread. Engage with your local government, attend community meetings, and make your voice heard. Demand that your leaders prioritize the needs of the community, not the interests of the powerful. Support organizations that are working to promote justice and equality, to empower marginalized communities, and to protect the rights of all citizens. Remember that change begins with each of us. It begins with a willingness to challenge the status quo, to question authority, and to stand up for what is right. It begins with a belief that we can create a better future, a more just and equitable society for all. The story of Alex Johnson and the community he helped to transform is a testament to the power of hope, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring quest for justice. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, light can prevail. Let us carry the lessons of this story with us, not just as a source of inspiration, but as a call to action. Let us commit ourselves to building communities where justice prevails, where every voice is heard, and where every citizen is empowered to participate in shaping their own destiny. This story is a reminder that one person can make a difference. What steps can we take to ensure that justice prevails in our own communities? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. But beyond a simple comment, we invite you to start dialogue. Share specific actions you're taking or plan to take in your own community. Connect with others who share your passion for justice. Discuss strategies, share resources, and build a network of support. This is not just about watching a story. It's about becoming part of a movement. It's about recognizing that we are all connected, that our struggles and triumphs are intertwined. It's about creating a world where justice is not just a dream, but a reality for all. Like this video, if you're moved by Alex's courage, share it with your friends and family to spread the message of hope and action. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, inform, and empower. And most importantly, let us know in the comments how you are taking action in your own community. Let's build a better world together.